Hello and welcome to IndiTalk. This is a show in which we tackle controversial issues of national importance, and today we are talking about the strength of Indian institutions like Parliament, the right to information setup, the press, the election commission. It seems that all of them, for some reason or the other, seem to be under attack. The press is under, well, not direct assault as it was under the emergency during Ms. Gandhi's time, but certainly facing tremendous amount of pressures is something that is not debatable anymore. You look at any serious journal, or you even look at the so-called pro-government journals, and you will find that there are references to the fact that there is the heavy breath of authoritarianism blowing down the necks of the owners of newspapers as well as the television industry. The RTI, right to information, as we all know, was without a commissioner for a long time, is being weakened. The environmental protection is under attack because posts in the National Green Tribunal have not been filled, and orders of the National Green Tribunal are very often flouted with impunity by the bureaucracy and by vested interests. The Election Commission, which was one of the India's great, a proud institution that upheld the whole concept of free voting without fear, without favor, as championed by T.N. Seshan, is also now under question for having compromised on some of the decisions that it has made. And certainly, as you can see lately, the judiciary isn't exactly now sheltered from the kind of criticism, the kind of open criticism it is receiving since the revolt of the so-called revolt, the mutiny of the 4 judges, the perhaps weakness in the face of executive assaults on judicial independence, and the lack of firm and resolute leadership, and certainly Parliament, which we know has barely functioned. Now, let's look at one institution. Let's look at Parliament as one of the great pillars of democracy. Well, democracy does not simply mean going to the ballot box and casting your vote. It's a lot more than that. That is only the embryonic stage of democracy. After that, the embryo grows into a multifaceted engine of checks and balances and countervailing centers of power, of accountability, of freedom of information, of transparency. All these things go together. And transparency mostly in the area where it comes to making laws. Now, the legislature is charged with making the laws of the country according to the wishes of the people, and sometimes according to the promises made in their various election manifestos. But are the laws that have been made by Parliament, are these really a product of parliamentary democracy, or are they often the power or the diktats of a very small group of very powerful people in the executive, without any real checks, balances, or any questioning from within Parliament? Well, trends seem to show that the executive, which is supposed to be checked by the legislature, there is no real separation of powers, because the legislature is an extension of the executive, and ministers really cannot be held accountable by the legislators of their own party. So, in this situation, what happens is that in order to short circuit the process of accountability, of very close scrutiny by Parliament, governments have been resorting to ruling through what they call ordinances. Now, an ordinance is really an emergency measure which is meant to tackle urgent problems when Parliament is not in session. But governments have often used this constitutionally granted right and ruled through fiats by bypassing parliamentary scrutiny. Now, I have a figure here which I'll read to you. The government has promulgated or re-promulgated 40 ordinances in 4 years without any parliamentary scrutiny. And this is not just the fault of the BJP government. The Congress is just as guilty. The earlier Congress-led UPA government had its own cross to bear. It passed some 61 ordinances in 10 years. Now, how many of these ordinances actually became law or were then actually approved by Parliament is another matter. But the tendency is growing, and look at some of the important ordinances that have been passed and with such fervor. Look, here are some ordinances passed by the Modi government in the past 4 years. Right? Ordinances, remember, not something that's been voted by the legislature for whom you and I vote, not by the people who represent us in Parliament. The Indian Medical Council Amendment Ordinance of 2016, the Dentist Amendment Ordinance of 2016, Enemy Property Amendment and Validation Second Ordinance of 2016, Uttarakhand Appropriation, Enemy Property, Arbitration and Conciliation, Right to Fair Compensation and Transparency in Land Acquisition, extremely important ordinance, Coal Mine Special Provisions, Insurance Laws, Telecom Regulatory Authority of India Amendment Ordinance, Criminal Law Amendment Ordinance of 2018, Fugitive Economic Offenders Ordinance of 2018. Among these ordinances, also one which calls for compulsory death for rapes of children. And the total number of ordinances promulgated by the President between 1952 and December 2014 stand at 679. So, what I'm saying is that this is not the way Parliament ought to work. This is simply short-circuiting the system, and we are pretending that just because we go and vote in by-elections or in general elections every 5 years, that we are a democracy. We are falling far short of a democracy if there is no debate and the government simply rules as if it is a dictatorship. As one senior advocate in the Supreme Court put it, he says, what we are seeing today is an abuse of Article 123 for what can be called a self-serving agenda, wherein the government brings in an ordinance to either counter political challenges or make a statement about an issue it has failed to address through its governance. Now, this is not the only problem with governance through Parliament, not just ordinances. Now, see, under the Westminster system of parliamentary democracy, how are ministers or the bills that they introduce in Parliament, how are they held accountable? There's something called the committee system. You have select committees on which members which are bipartisan in nature, in which all parties participate. You have joint committees of the Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha. You have standing committees and you have ad hoc committees. Now, the purpose of these committees, and especially the standing committees, is to examine these bills in such a way in which so they cannot be threatened by the power structure. These meetings happen behind closed doors. The ministers are not made part of these standing committees, and people can look at it and record their dissent without their names. They can record it anonymously, and they can freely discuss without being influenced by any lobbies or by the party whip system, and make the points of view known, and then only then will the bill, in the larger public interest, go to the larger part of Parliament and then be voted. But that bill will have behind it the strength of a huge amount of human resources in terms of brain power and the true representation of the people and their feelings into matters of absolute importance. You know that laws concerning some of the important laws which have been passed without ever going to the committee system include the National Judicial Appointments Commission Act of 2014, which is still being debated, which is one of the largest points of contention today, which is the largest political debate in the country today in terms of the independence of the judiciary. The Insolvency Bankruptcy Code Amendment of 2018, the Aadhaar Act, the Aadhaar Targeted Delivery of Financial and Other Subsidies Benefits Act of 2016, as well as laws with far-reaching consequences such as Atomic Energy Amendment, the Citizenship Amendment Act, the Lokpal and Lok Ayukta Amendment Act, and the Collection of Statistics Amendment Act. They were passed without referral to any committee. And in fact, one of the best pieces I've read on this subject is by a legal scholar, Malvika Prasad. The piece is available on the net, and I commend it to anyone who wants to understand the committee system and how important it is to the functioning of a good democracy. She explains that upon being introduced in the Lok Sabha, bills are referred to a standing committee for deeper analysis. Standing committees appointed for a year, mirror the composition of parliament with up to 21 members from the Lok Sabha and 10 from the Raj Sabha. Thus, they represent divergent interests. Now, are our laws democratically enacted? The short answer, and I agree with Malvika, is no. Because when bills are not referred to committees, the ruling party controls not only the formulation of policy in the Union Cabinet, but also the passing of the bill in the Lok Sabha. This is why bills can be passed within minutes by sheer force of numbers, without engaging in any debate, as was the case, as you saw in the budget session. Now, the Aadhaar bill, which is now being debated in the Supreme Court as a violation of the fundamental right to privacy, which the Supreme Court says you and I all have, was actually hidden as a money bill. Now, a money bill does go to the Raj Sabha. The Raj Sabha can reject the bill, but if it's a money bill and within 2 weeks of even the Raj Sabha's rejection of that bill, it becomes law. So therefore, an important act like that also went through without any real parliamentary scrutiny. So in other words, a handful of ministers, the Union Cabinet, get to decide what shall be the law for an entire nation of 1 billion people. What we have today in the country is the supremacy of the executive in democratic constitutions' clothing. This is the warning that Malvika issues in that wonderful article of hers, and it's a warning worth repeating. That's all for today on IndiTalk. I'm Inderjit Badhwar. We'll be back again with another subject of controversial importance soon. Until then, catch us.